Year I was born.
1682? You look good for your age. My goodness gracious. Here we go.
I'm standing on the world stage for Canada. Hi, this is Leona Boyd. Nothing compares to the feeling I always get performing as a Canadian. I've toured with Gordon Lightfoot. You don't get more Canadian than that. Please, buy Canadian. Shop as if your country depends on it. Keep your money in Canada for Canada.
What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get a city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1682 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Yes, We Are Open, an award-winning podcast from Monaris, hosted by FOTM Al Grego. Silverwax.ca. Use promo code TorontoMike10 at checkout and save 10% at silverwax.ca. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. Building Toronto Skyline, a podcast and book from Nick Iones, sponsored by Fusion Corp Construction Management, Inc. And Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Joining me today, making his Toronto Mic debut, it's radio veteran Paul Fisher. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Nice to be here in your cozy little studio.
And thank you for not hitting your head on the ceiling. That's half the battle here, Paul. But it's good to meet you. I have a little housekeeping, and then I want to set up, how we got connected. But I feel like right away, because you drove a great distance to be here, right away, we should crack open our fresh Great Lakes beer on the mic. What do you say?
I think that's a great idea, and since I won't be driving for at least another 90 minutes to 2 hours, I can have a beer.
You can have a beer. What are you drinking there, by the way? What is that?
I have a Great Lakes Brewery Premium Lager.
Okay, you've got the Premium Lager, and I have the Sunnyside Session IPA, so we'll go 3, 2, 1. So cheers to you, Paul.
Cheers to you.
Good to meet you. So a little housekeeping off the top. How does that taste?
That's a good beer. It's very good beer.
I bet you it was canned like 2 weeks ago. So they brew that beer in Southern Etobicoke, and you're in Southern Etobicoke right now. And, I do regular pickups because I give beer to every guest. You're bringing home some Great Lakes beer with you, Paul?
Fantastic.
And it's always fresh, and it's delicious, and they're fiercely independent, proud Canadian company. So we love our Great Lakes beer here. But okay, so speaking of Great Lakes, Paul, I had previously announced to the listenership that TMLX 18, that's the 18th Toronto Mic listener experience, was going to be June 26th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Great Lakes Brewery. And I announced to the listenership that Palma Pasta would feed us all that night, and everyone was invited. You're invited as well, Paul. So I'm here to tell people that is still happening. TMLX is happening on June 26th at Great Lakes Brewery, but it is no longer TMLX 18. That is now TMLX 19, because here's the breaking news, Paul. You ready?
I'm ready.
We're going to have a TMLX 18 on May 11th at 1:30 p.m. at Christie Pitts. We're going to take in some Toronto Maple Leafs baseball, and we're all going to gather just beyond the left field fence. So everybody is invited to hang at TMLX 18 on May 11th. That's a Sunday at 1:30 p.m. at Christie Pitts, where the Maple Leafs play baseball. And then we'll get together again on June 26th for TMLX 19. You got it, Paul?
I got it.
Okay.
And I'm available those days.
Well, if Paul Fisher came out to these events, I think that would be huge. So we would love to see you there. By the way, I mentioned Palma Pasta is feeding us at TMLX 19 on June 26th. Can I send you home with a large frozen lasagna from Palma Pasta? Seriously, Paul.
Are you my grandmother?
I'm your nona.
My nona.
Do you have a nona?
Not an Italian nona. Actually, I'm all out of grandmothers this lifetime, unfortunately.
Well, I am too. So we shout out to Ridley Funeral Home.
I would love Palma Pasta's lasagna, frozen or otherwise.
Now, Fisher, that is an Italian name, of course. Fisher. No, I kid. Is that a real name?
It's when I was a kid, I hated my last name because everybody could make fun of it in school, right?
Right.
And to make matters worse, when I first moved to Canada from England, I had a very strong Cockney accent. I was, 8 years old. I have no accent now at all whatsoever, except after a few scotches maybe. But and I hated my name. And then I get into radio, and I use my real name, and people are going, "That's a great name. That's a great radio name. How'd you come up with that? What's your real name?"
Well, that's why I ask. So many radio guys come over, and I find out, oh, that's not their real name at all.
Well, there was a whole thing that went on, in the 60s in particular, especially AM radio. Everybody was Scott Carpenter or
There's a good example.
John Baker or that's a made up name, but
but Scott Carpenter, who's been over here, that's a great example.
The
greaser.
Pat Bergen. Yeah,
that's right. Okay, well we'll get into your bona fides as a radio guy for sure. One guy who did not change his name though was Roger Ashby. Like he's actually a Roger Ashby,
and a great radio name and a great radio guy.
And you're a great radio guy. You got a great radio name, but that's your real name as well. So this is what happened, Paul. So follow along with me, and then we're going to hear all about your life in radio. But about a year ago, FOTM, Jeff Lumby. FOTM means friend of Toronto Mike. You're now an FOTM.
Oh, thank you. Jeff Lumby's a great friend of mine.
So Jeff Lumby wrote me about a year ago. In fact, I pulled his email from about a year ago, and he wrote, "I have an idea for a potential guest for you. Do you know who Paul Fisher is? He used to be the PD at CHFI during the glory years. He was the last guy I worked for when I decided to retire. Now he's got a new book coming out that has a very interesting theme." So I get this email from Jeff about a year ago, and Jeff links me to a chat you had with a woman I'd referred to as almost FOTM because she was in the calendar, and then she was too busy or something was going on and it never happened, but maybe one day it'll happen. But Glenda Fordham.
Oh, yeah.
And I was reading, Glenda chatted with you about your debut novel, Like a River to the Sea.
Yes.
Which I'm hoping maybe after our radio chat, we can chat a little bit about that, and I can find out if there's a second book in you. So this is all going to happen in this conversation. But I don't remember. I think I said to myself, I would like to talk to Paul Fisher, but I don't know why I never reached out to book this in my calendar. But let's fast forward several months, to an email I received from FOTM Dave Charles. How do you know Dave Charles?
Well, I think most people in radio know Dave through his consulting work and the work that he and John Pericol did together for many, many years. So I knew Dave way back when. But when he moved back from Australia, I forget the year. It was maybe 2009, 2010, something like that. And one day he called me or emailed me, actually, and said we should have a coffee. He and I went out, had a coffee, and then spent the next 2 or 3 months looking for locations where we could open up a coffee shop together.
Really?
Yeah. It was crazy because I did a spreadsheet on it and showed it to Dave, and Dave says, "Yeah, this makes sense to me, and let's go look at locations." And we even went so far as to checking out rents and where would we end up? Neither one of us really wanted to work in the coffee shop, to be honest, but we wanted to own one.
Sure.
It never happened.
It's interesting because you do hear stories about people who they get together and they're like, "Hey, let's open a bar or a restaurant or whatever." But coffee shop. So why did it never happen? You just did the math and you realized it would be a lot of work and risky.
We sort of came to the conclusion that, and I've heard this from people who own actual, franchises like a Tim Hortons or a McDonald's or something. Yeah. They say, you buy one and you're working 7 days a week. You buy 2 and you take off a few days a week. You buy 3 and you say goodbye to the whole mess and just cash your checks. So we didn't see ourselves becoming owners of a coffee chain. So instead, we went off in a different tangent and met with a couple of people. Bob Makowitz was one of them. Gary Muth was another one of them. And we were looking at trying to buy a radio station.
How long ago was this?
About 2012-ish, I guess.
Okay. Mako Sr., I had Mako Jr. on the show, and I actually tried to get Mako Sr. on the show because I really wanted to talk to Makowitz. And it never came together, one of the many episodes that never came together. Would you say a word or two about what kind of a chap Mako Sr. was?
I didn't know Bob that well, to be honest. I mean, we knew of each other through the industry, but around that time, we used to have meetings at my house on Florence Avenue, which is up around Yonge and 401. I don't live there anymore, but I did at the time. And I had a big dining room, so that's where we'd have our meetings where we were going to take over the world. And he was very insightful. We were looking for a format, and he wanted to push us towards country. And I was willing to follow, but I was much more going in a different direction. But it turns out one of the stations we were trying to buy, and of course it didn't go anywhere, but was the Old Wave in Hamilton, which then became that fantastic country station owned by Durham Radio. And they did incredibly well with that format. And had we followed Bob's advice and had we actually did the purchase, I'd be too busy to do this interview right now.
He knew what he was talking about. Mako Sr.
He was able to sift through and find the little gem in there.
Wow. Now, to read, this is what Dave Charles wrote me, and it's only earlier this year, actually, early 2025. Dave Charles, similar to Jeff Lumby, he writes, "Have you interviewed Paul Fisher yet? Formerly of CHFI. He's a good friend of mine and worthy of a Toronto Mic'd episode. Uh-huh. He'll have some great stories about his time with Rogers Radio in Toronto. Paul will be taking over running our annual radio and records party at Roy Thompson Hall with Cam Carpenter. Gary Muth and I, after 15 good years, will continue to enjoy the summer party we started, but as guests, and this is a lovely note from Dave where it's a humble brag that I'm reading this because it's very kind. He says, "Your energy and love of broadcast music podcasting gives this salty old dog reason to believe that the next generation of communicators is in great hands." So we love Dave Charles on this show, and I finally said enough is enough. Let's get Paul Fisher in the calendar.
Well, that's very kind of Dave to say all that. And I had no idea Jeff contacted you. I was in touch with him just a few weeks ago, just because we're going to be spending some time in France in several weeks. And I said, here's where we're going to be. How close are we to you and Julie? Because they moved to France a couple of years ago, as you may know.
Yes.
And we're about 4 hours away. So we're going to try and make something
Jump
happen.
on that train. Great trains there.
Yeah. We'll see. We're going to be mostly in the Provence area, and he's going to meet us halfway, and it'll be about 4 hours.
Okay, because I was going to say, I've never been to the Lumbee estate in France, but...
and I don't think I'm invited this time either.
Well, I produce a show for Humble and Fred, a couple of names you know.
Yes.
And Humble did go to France to visit his buddy Lumbee. In fact, remember, it was Humble and Lumbee that were on the air in Montreal when Humble gets recruited to come to Toronto and create Humble and Fred. Mm. So they go back way back.
They're very good friends, all three of them.
Yeah, and they got the Saskatchewan roots, and they go back to Western Canada days. But so Howard, and he tells me that Lumbee's got like I don't know what the word for it is, but it's like a cabin on his property for guests. But like you could have your own living, and you could cook there,
now you
and wash your clothes. I know, and it's like you're in France, but you're on his property, and you could live there for a couple of weeks. Like it sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah, well, Jeff normally does things very well, so I'm sure he did his move to France very well.
He's. I'm just putting this out there because Lumbee's going to hear this episode, and then he'll invite you to live there for a little while.
Or perhaps you.
Well, maybe we'll go together. I would love it. Okay. So take me back. Some people listening will know Paul Fisher well from CHFI, and some will be learning about you right now. But can you just take us back in what made you want to get into radio?
I think the moment I wanted to get into radio was probably around midnight one night. We had just moved to Toronto from London, England. And my bed was literally a blue fabric-covered beach chair in the kitchen. We moved over with not much and didn't acquire much after that. So I'm laying in bed with a transistor radio that my dad had bought me. I didn't have a transistor radio in England. I didn't even know if I could pick up much. But so I was listening in 1964 when the Beatles landed at Malton Airport.
Right.
And I was, I think, 8. Was I 8?
Does that math check out? 64? What year were you born? I can do this for you.
I was 9.
Math is tough. Okay,
I was 9. We came over when I was 8. And, you know, I wish I could remember who was doing the reports that night. I want to say it was Bob McAdory, but you'd have to check. I know he was with Chum. I don't know if he was with Chum in 64, but for some reason his image stays in my mind. But I'm laying in bed. The transistor is laying on the pillow. My ear is on the transistor. And, you know, had I known then what it did to hearing, but that's another matter. And I'm listening to this guy, whoever it was, describe the Beatles arriving at Malton Airport. And I thought, to me, he was the star. It wasn't the Beatles that night. I mean, I loved their music even then, but he just had command of the kingdom.
Right. And
I thought, I'd just love to be able to do something like that. And then years later, I think, you know, I grew up in Toronto, so I'm listening to people like David Marsden, David Pritchard, Jim Bauer.
Oh, the Chum FM guys.
The Chum FM guys. I mean, and I listen to all the Chum AM guys too. But really, I had in my mind that if I ever got into radio, there's one station to work at, Chum FM. And I finally got there after a little while. And anyway, so I'm around 15, 16. What am I going to do with my life? I'm at this point either going to be a rock star or the guy who plays them on the radio. And I listened to my guitar chops, and they weren't that great. And, you know, I played it safe. I thought, if I get into radio, I'm going to have a regular paycheck, regular job. You know, I can buy a house one day, you know, settle down the whole bit. None of life on the road as a rock star. And kind of wish I'd taken that rock star route a little bit for a little way, but radio filled that desire in me as much as being in a band would have, I think. Because back in the day, you got to remember, you could be really creative. Even when I got to Chum FM, we were still picking our own music, which was great. Well, that doesn't happen anymore, anywhere.
No, I mean, a good close friend of mine people who listen to this program here on episodes of Toast every month, Bob Willett, he's got this 6 days a week. He's on Indie 88. And once in a while we'll be like, hey, why don't you play a Spoon song or something? Because his co-host for these Toast episodes is a guy who was in Spoons, Rob Pruce. And he's just like very honest with us, which is he has zero input, zero influence on any of the music that gets played.
And that's the way it is. And in some ways, that's the way it needs to be or needed to be at the time. But, you know, one of the main reasons I got involved in radio was I wanted to create things because I was listening to David Pritchard at 2:00 in the morning and, right. You know, Rainer Schwartz and all these great names. I hesitate to have a shopping list because I'll forget somebody like Pete and Geets, you know, and go, oh my God, how could you forget Geets and Pete?
And it's my contractual obligation to tell you when you name an FOTM. So I want to just shout out David Marsden and Geets Romo, a couple of guys who have spent time in this space.
Yeah. You know, Marsden was just incredible, you know, back then. And he was I remember calling him once or twice, you know, on the Chum listener line, whatever. And I was not in radio at the time, but I just wanted to reach out to him. And he was very gracious, very gracious.
But I don't even know if these timelines work, but did you listen to Dave Mickey?
No. And I know he was Dave Mickey on EY, but no, the first I heard of him was as David Mars.
Yeah, because he goes to Montreal, I guess, and then he comes back to Chile.
Something like that, yeah. And when I see the old pictures of him as Dave Mickey, I feel like I'm watching some teen dance show, which is probably what he was hosting back then.
He was for CBC. He was hosting one of those shows, and when I hear the audio of Dave Mickey. And I think about the guy I know who's David Marsden, and it's night and day, right? Like one is just rapid fire delivery, and then David Marsden's kind of chill, like the Mars bar.
Yeah. No, he honed his talent beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious, like, what's your first radio gig?
My first radio gig. So I went to Humber College.
Okay.
It was the second year that they were having the radio program there, and 72 or 3, I forget exactly when that was, but somewhere in there.
Sure.
And after about 3 months, my instructor at the time said, I have a friend who works at a station in Oshawa. It's now, what's it?
The Rock.
The Rock. Sorry, I was going to say Rock 95, but no, it's The Rock.
The last terrestrial station to employ David Marsden.
Yes, there you go. So back then it was CKQS, QS for Quality Stereo.
Okay.
And we played, Montavani, 101 Strings, all these horrible crooners, and but it was radio. And so I went out there, and the guy said, well, I have this gig, and here's what it pays. Nothing. It was David Lennox who hired me, David's still around, still, making noise on the internet, but I'm not sure what he's up to these days besides selling a bunch of old 1920s discs that he found in some garage underwater somewhere.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I went there and I said, okay, look, I'll work free for you for a month. And then if you like me, hire me. And if you don't like me, I'll go back to school. Because at the time, Phil Stone, who ran the course, was saying, oh, you're taking a month off. You can't do that. This is a 3-year program and blah, 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 blah. And so a month later, I go to him and I say, Phil, and David Spencer was the other guy who was working.
They all
with
have
Phil
to be
there.
named David. That's like 3.
I think that was his real name, too. I said, Phil, they've offered me a job in Oshawa. I'm taking. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm taking it. He goes, you're crazy. Finish your course. I said, well, sorry, I'm the impetuous type, and I took it. And so I worked there for 2.5 years. It was wonderful and awful all at the same time, and I wouldn't change anything about it. I lived in Oshawa for a few months in this basement apartment that was so damp you almost had to wear a bathing suit in it. And I'd get to work. My shift was noon to 6, but I'd get to work at about 8 in the morning, and I'd leave around midnight. And I didn't care. I just wanted to be immersed in it.
You loved it.
I loved it. I loved everything about it. And I spent 40-something years in radio, never worked a day in my life.
Well, if you love what you do, that's you're never going to work a day in your life. But Paul,
exactly it.
Quick question. So you mentioned you were like the second year of the Humber radio courses.
Yeah, which I think now they've just recently closed it down.
Well, this is where I'm going, Paul. I'm playing 3D chess over here. Any thoughts on the fact that I believe I just saw a video with FOTM Evelyn Macko, like the final, like saying goodbye to the program. I believe that program has been shuttered.
Yeah, I don't know if Evie was teaching at Humber. I thought she was over at Centennial or somewhere. I'm not sure.
Okay,
but I know she was teaching radio to students,
sure,
and
sure.
I've certainly had a few friends do that and gone to lecture at one or two. But about all the courses closing, well, on the one hand, I think it's very sad. On the other hand, I think it's a reality of what's going on, not just in the business, but in the communications industry in general. Radio is fragmenting like crazy. Everything has fragmented. And what was radio 20 years ago is just a different form of radio now, except some of it's podcasting, some of it's Spotifying, I mean, we're still doing all the things that radio does. It's just it's happening on so many different platforms now.
Well, you're actually reading my mind, Paul. I don't know if you do that as a side hustle, but you're doing it right now.
I do. In your pocket right now, you have $42.
If I had $42, I would be out of here spending it. That would be amazing. But Paul, here's what I'm thinking. I do read about all these radio courses going. And again, I never worked in radio a day in my life. I don't know anything about working in radio. I just enjoyed listening to radio. And I love talking to people like you because we're going to do a nice jog down memory lane, revisit like the 1980s radio wars. Like this is going to be great, of great interest to me. But when I hear about these like closures and shuttering of these radio programs, my first thought is, why not like pivot so they're not radio programs, they're broadcasting programs that aren't necessarily for terrestrial radio like we're but you mentioned podcasting and all the other. I mean, what I'm doing now is just something somebody's going to listen to instead of CHFI.
You're doing radio by appointment, that's all.
Right. So why not continue to teach people? It doesn't have to be, oh, you're going to get a job at Chum. It can be, you might be able to start your own podcast, join a network. Who knows?
Listen, I think what has happened in radio and in print and in TV and in movies at the theater or the cinema, I think the same thread is going through all of that. And what happened maybe a decade ago, I didn't bother to note the exact date, but
how dare you?
We went from a push to a pull industry, the communications industry, let's call it. So back in the day, the 6 o'clock news came on TV at what time? 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. I'm ready for the pop quiz.
And there were two editions of the Toronto Star and the Telegram and the Globe and Mail, the morning edition, the afternoon edition, and all of that.
Right.
And if you wanted to hear your favorite group or song on the radio, you had to wait till they pushed it out to you.
Unless you knew a good jukebox.
Unless you had the secret phone number to the bat phone.
Right.
And so when it became more of a pull industry,
right.
Now I can watch the 6 o'clock news at 8 o'clock.
Right.
Because back in the day, and even now, who the hell is home at 6 o'clock to watch the TV news? Look at the highways. Nobody's home. Well, people are home, obviously, but
it's an on-demand world.
And when things moved to on-demand, it fundamentally changed the entire radio landscape, the entire TV news landscape, the entire newspaper landscape. I used to wait for the newspaper to arrive, right? And you go, oh, geez, what's happened?
Right. You and me both.
And now, God, I consume news 24/7 on my laptop, my phone, occasionally on the radio, but mostly I pull it all when I want it.
Right.
I pull it to me rather than waiting for them to push it out to me. And that was a huge change.
100%. I think the last bastion of real-time consumption of media is sports. And maybe there's a few exceptions, maybe the Oscars and things like that where people want it, but sports.
You're right about sports. When I moved down to Niagara-on-the-Lake a couple of years ago with my girlfriend, we decided not to get cable. I hadn't had cable for years, all online watching, right? And so I had to put a TV antenna on the roof so I could watch NFL games on Sunday and watch them live. And for that, yes, I had to convert to their schedule.
Last night, I made sure I'm in front of that TV at 7 p.m. because the puck was going to drop in a few minutes, and I wanted to watch the Leafs clinch it in 5. Yeah. That did not happen.
No, it didn't. And live sports, that's one of the few exceptions to the on-demand route, because I so some people, if they're going to miss a game because they're working or they're at some event, don't tell me, I'm going to watch it tonight at 11 o'clock.
Scene, and I never understood it personally, but
and I've tried that, and I can't watch something knowing it's taped.
You, me both.
And going, come on, team, because all I got to do is flip to the back, and I can see who won.
My mind is blown by the people who will be like, oh, I PVR'd the Blue Jay game, and I'm going to be watching it later, so they kind of avoid spoilers or whatever. Blows my mind, because I can't do that, and I've never been able to do it. Like, this is a real-time news happening, and it happens, and if I missed it, I missed it. There is no watching it post on demand.
Yeah, some things just have to be live, I think.
Right.
And, radio's much better at that than podcasting, although not that much of radio's live these days anymore.
No, but let's go back in time to when you were, so I'm curious what happens after Oshawa, because you're of a era
Yep.
when radio was a BFD, a big fucking deal. This is what we can swear on this show too.
It was an HFD to me. A huge fucking deal.
That's okay. It's a huge fucking deal. So, what happens to you after the station that eventually would become known as The Rock? What was it called back then?
CKQS.
Oh yeah,
and then it
quality.
became QT, and then it became The Rock.
Okay.
But I don't even know if they're in the same place. I think it was 360 King Street West.
Well, I can tell you where they are because I've been there fairly recently. It's an airport.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they moved away years ago from 360 King. I remember Doug Kirk told me that they were going to be doing that airport location, which it kind of makes sense. Airport.
It was cool.
Airwaves.
I mean, when I dug the tour of the studio and the airport there. But okay, so what happens after Oshawa?
So I go into Oshawa and I am just on top of the world. Immediately start sending audition tapes to Duff Roman at Chum FM.
Wow.
Yeah. Duff Roman immediately said, "Stop sending me audition tapes."
Because that's your. But you wanted to be on. Yeah, you wanted to be on Chum FM. Right?
I wanted to be on air at Chum FM, something awful, and I guess I was awful. Duff finally convinced me. He said, "I'm not going to hire you from Oshawa. You got to go somewhere else first." And then, much to my surprise, I get a phone call from a guy I didn't know at the time, whose name was Ross Davies. And I knew who Ross's dad was, George Davies. George was a consultant for Chum and maybe others, but certainly for Chum. And Ross was about to start managing possibly his first managerial job or program director job in Calgary at CJ92. And I get this call from this Ross Davies guy, say, I'm going to be in Toronto. You want to meet at the Sheraton Centre? I have a station out west I want to talk to you about. And I said, okay, great. I didn't know anything about it.
Right.
And it turns out his dad had heard me and said, you're starting this new station. Duff wants this guy to, I don't know if Duff specifically said this to him, but, somebody at Chum wants him to get some experience. So why don't you hire him in Calgary and then maybe they'll bring him to Toronto one day. So that was very cool. I got a job at CJ doing middays. Worked there for 14 months. Loved it. It was terrifying because I'd never been west of Mississauga. Anyway, that worked out. And then 14 months into it, I get a call from Warren Cosford. I've got a bunch of tapes here from you. Send me a current one. Sent him a current one. And I was in Toronto 10 days later, doing all nights on Chum FM.
Wow. So that's it. You're like living the dream.
So I should have retired.
That should be it. That's it. You gotta. I learned this from Seinfeld too.
Top.
Go out on. Everything comes back to Seinfeld. Go out on top.
Oh, that was such a fabulous show. I didn't watch it when it came out.
Oh.
I remember we were living in the country just north of Toronto.
Yeah.
Near Aurora, and my wife at the time was, watch the show, it's fantastic. I go, I don't like sitcoms. And I think I watched one. I said, this is not for me. And then one day, not too much later, the light went off and I went, I got to check out this Seinfeld show. I swear I've seen every episode 100 times like most people, but the writing, I mean, Larry David was brilliant. The characters who they cast, and on Netflix, you can go back and you can watch episode 1, like right from episode 1.
The Seinfeld Chronicles.
And you see the first half dozen episodes and you go, ooh, that's a little raw, a little rough. And then it came together, George became George.
Right.
Elaine became Elaine.
Well, there was no Elaine in the first episode. I don't think Elaine exists in the first episode.
I don't know when she came in, but, she obviously became such an integral part of
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I still think to this day, Seinfeld's probably I don't even want to call it a sitcom, but it's just one of the very best TV series ever.
Agreed. And it's rare that a day goes by when you don't drop a Seinfeld reference. Like I actually happen to have the same experience with The Simpsons, where it's rare a day goes by I don't drop a Simpsons reference. But between the two of them, many a reference is dropped by yours truly. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Exactly.
Okay. So, there's our little Seinfeld tangent. I love it. Okay. So we have you in, how do we get you back to Toronto? Warren Cosford. By the way, shout out to Warren Cosford, who not once, not twice, but 3 times was in the Toronto Mic'd recording calendar before he regretfully pulled himself out because some plans had changed or whatever. So he's like the FOTM who got away. But you end up on Chum FM at night and pick up the story there.
Okay, so I fly home to Toronto, middle of the afternoon on, I can't even tell you the exact day, but it was February 1979.
Okay.
It might have been the 15th or something, but it was around the middle of the month. So I dropped my stuff off. I go back to my parents' house. My dad's deceased by a couple of years at that point, but my brother, sister, and stepmother were living there. Drop the stuff off, take a nap, show up at the Chum FM front door at 11:30 p.m. Ingrid Schumacher is on the air. I love Ingy.
I love her too.
And I had been told up front, by Warren, show up anytime after 11, but before midnight, and Ingy will show you the board. So, it was... People could tell you what kind of board it was. It was one of these beautiful old boards that, it was knobs. It wasn't faders. We ended up getting that while I was still there. But so, I buzz the door, and Ingy's lovely, and to this day remains so.
And what year did you say it was?
It was 79. It was February 79.
Okay.
And she said, "So, what are you going to do for your first song?" And I said, "Well, I want to pick something long because I'm nervous." So I picked "Sweet Judy Blue Eyes," Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Long one, yeah.
And like I say, back then we could still pick our music. Well, more or less. I mean, you wouldn't bring something in from home, but the library was wide open, pretty much. Occasionally there'd be a piece of splicing tape over a track, or somebody would get very upset and use a nail and scratch out a song.
Oh, no.
But, essentially you could play what you wanted. Okay. And so... Ingy does this extra to her show and says, "By the way, our new guy, blah, 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 Paul Fisher, midnight, keep you company." And she says something to me, and I say something to her, and she goes, "What's your first song going to be, Paul?" I go, "Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, Ingrid," and here we go on 104.5 Chum FM, or whatever we were calling it back then. Hit start. It was turntables. I hit start, fade up. Stephen Stills going crazy on guitar. I look at Ingy and smile and turn my chair, and I hit the turntable with the chair. The tone arm goes up in the air. Yeah. But I'm young and smart. I grab the tone arm. The mic is off at this point, and I'm holding the tone arm, and Ingy's going, "Put the needle down." I'm going, I can't. Put the needle down.
That's funny.
So I dropped it at the beginning of the song.
Baptism by fire.
And you know what? What a perfect introduction.
Wow.
Because things had to get better after that.
Well, and this begins your Toronto radio career.
Yes, it did.
Okay. Ingrid Schumacher, who was on Chum FM for 30 years.
I was going to say 30 years.
It could have been that.
Forever.
At least more than 25. Absolutely.
Yeah, forever.
And I had her over. A couple of interesting Ingrid facts. I like that chat very much, actually. One is that she was on the air the night John Lennon was killed.
And I was on the air doing the morning show the morning after.
Morning after. Okay.
And it was Brian Master and I doing the morning show.
Brian Master, who you'll work with again at CHFI. But
yes.
I got to shout out another great FOTM who comes out to TMLX events. So Brian, if you're listening, I hope to see you at TMLX 18 and 19.
And I'll see you at one of them.
Which one?
Or maybe both.
Well, at least come to 19 at Great Lakes Brewery, which I have to remind myself is 19, not 18, because for the last 6 months I've been calling it TMLX 18, and then now we have a new TMLX 18. It's very complicated in this business. You understand, Paul? Okay, so back to Brian Master.
Too many numbers. So Pete and Geets had been doing the morning show, and then Geets left, if I have the chronology right, Geets left to go to CFNY. Pete followed sometime after that.
Right.
So they didn't know what to do with the morning show, and they it was probably Ross Davies, but I'm sure in consultation with others. Brian and I did the morning show for, I think it was close to 3 months. It was never given to us as the morning show. It was like, you guys are filling in. Okay, no problem.
Right, interim.
Happy for it. So the night that Lennon was shot, I was living just north of Chum FM, up around Yonge and Davisville. And, late that evening, I get a phone call from Ross Davies, who's received news from others. And he goes, John Lennon's been shot, and he's now being declared dead. And you're on the morning show tomorrow. I go, yeah, I know. He said, well, Brian Master just called me. He's sick. He can't do the show. You're doing it yourself. I said, oh, shit. Okay. He said, don't worry. We'll have lots of support. And, I mean, it was a terrible situation, obviously, with the Lennon shooting. But you have to move things forward from there. So that next morning, so Ingy was on the air that night leading up to midnight, and I was on the air at 6 a.m.
And is it simply, did you take calls, for example? Do you remember?
Well,
or you just playing a lot of Beatles and John Lennon music?
The great thing about Chum, back in the day, and I'm sure to this very day, I think I can easily say that, although now it's Bell, but fantastic people. Great resource of talent and of information, and Ross and I don't know who exactly, but the folks in the production department pulled old Beatles interviews, Lennon interviews. They said all of this stuff will be ready for you in the morning. So it was like kind of sitting down to a 12-course meal of, okay, what are we going to do? Let's go to this tape of Lennon in bed with Yoko. Okay, Let's go to this tape with Nick Lowe, who said something.
Mars Bar was there in the bed-in.
Yes, yeah.
He was telling me that story. And just a quick shout out to another guy in this neighborhood who I quite like, Sir Jerry Levitan. Do you know Sir Jerry?
I don't
know. As a teenager, he interviewed John Lennon at the King Eddie Hotel. And they made a doc about it that was Oscar nominated and everything. It's quite something. But I'm sure you have a wealth of John Lennon phone calls and interviews and stuff at your disposal.
We had all that stuff. And, back in, again, was it 65 when they stayed at the King Eddie? But I remember riding my bike. I grew up around High Park, Parkdale, kind of on the border. And riding my bike down to the King Eddie, and, standing there with 10,000 other 8 to 17-year-olds and going, oh, I think I see them in that window up there. So,
amazing.
But morning after the shooting, Kelly J.
You're going solo talking about, and what a huge, I'm trying to think of an equivalent, for the Gen X listeners who are probably listening to a lot of Edge 102 at the time, the Kurt Cobain death, that's the closest I can think of when Kurt Cobain kills himself at 27. But this is a Beatle who was shot dead in New York City.
I remember walking into the studio that morning thinking, I'm playing through the phone call from last night in my head. I'm going, okay, this is real. This is really happening. Because
Howard Cosell told you it was real. So.
Yeah. Well, if Howard says.
Yeah.
But that morning, I mean, really, all the kudos go to the people who did all the prep overnight to get it ready, and they were calling people. So like Kelly J from Crowbar, who was doing work at Chum FM at the time, he and his girlfriend at the time were doing a bunch of overnight shows at that point. And, he had stories about John Lennon at Bad Manners, which was the Crowbar mansion or whatever.
Right.
I forget all the people who came through the studio that morning, but I was a ringleader. It wasn't my show. It was, I was going, okay, you next. Okay, you next. You next. Okay, play that. It was like I was an executive producer or something, but it sounds odd to say it was an amazing morning because it was a terrible morning. But after the fact, when you look back and you go, wow, all of this came together so quickly, so professionally, so, seemingly effortlessly, but there was tons of effort put into it.
Right.
And it showed me the magic of radio all over again, because that morning, people were calling in, they're in tears. People are standing on a street corner with a coffee with tears in their eyes. It was major event. Major event.
And Toronto Mike correspondent 1236 lets me know that Ingrid Schumacher was on Chum FM for 39 years, from 1977 to 2016. And the second fun fact, I was the first that she was on the air the night John Lennon was shot. The second is, of course, She was married to Cleve Anderson, the
Cleve
original
Anderson,
drummer for Blue Rodeo, who made his Toronto Mike debut last month.
Well, the first time I saw Cleve Anderson was when he was drumming for Battered Wives.
Yes, yes, the name that wouldn't get you played on many a station. I suppose.
And that's when I was working in Calgary, and Battered Wives were playing the Jubilee Auditorium in Calgary, and they were opening for Elvis Costello. Right. And I think it was Elvis Costello's first tour, perhaps. If he'd been around before that, I didn't know. So that was a pretty cool night. And of course, back then, I didn't know who Cleve was except the drummer. Right. Later, I'd see him socially with Ingy and all of that. But
yeah, well, you can't miss that hair.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're on the Dream Station. You're on Chum FM. Why do you end up leaving Chum FM in 1981? I suppose it is.
Well, it was 81. It was April 81. I left because I had a longtime seemingly longtime girlfriend at the time, and I'm thinking about, maybe we're going to have a life together, maybe we're going to get married, maybe we're going to, want to enjoy the finer things of life. And as I love Chum. Not a single negative thing to say about Chum. Just fantastic. Except for the fact that I thought, geez, my last name is not Waters. It's not Davies. It's not this. It's not that. I think if I stay here, I'm going to be a pretty good jock, and that's about it. And I wanted more. At that point, I wanted to create some things. I had some ideas.
Right.
And so I started, I looked around. I talked to people at CKFM back when it was CKFM. And I talked to some AM stations before, we saw the writing on the wall for that. Although AM still continues.
Well, they didn't flip CFTR to all news until 93, I think.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that story after too.
Okay, don't forget.
And so I was listening around the dial, and my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife for 20 odd years or something.
Okay.
Well, some of them were odd because of me. And she listened to FI a lot, CHFI. And it wasn't really on my radar because I had worked for a station like that in Oshawa, right? Because at the time back then, CHFI was not just playing beautiful music, but a huge percentage of it was beautiful music. There was an instrumental commitment, CRTC commitment. I don't know if it might have been 30% had to be instrumental. And, we had a bunch of Category 6 commitments. So I got to do a jazz show, which was great because I love jazz. Sunday morning, 6 a.m., good luck with that. But there it was, counting for the requirements.
Okay.
And so I listened around and I thought, well, I really want to be a program director. I decided that. Saw what Ross was doing at Chum FM, said, I want to do that job. So I started lobbying Peggy Colston-Weir at CHFI. I don't know if you are familiar with her. She was a big name in radio back then, absolutely. I don't think she's been in radio for many years now, but certainly anybody from that era would know Peggy. And it got to the point where I would call and her secretary, assistant would say, oh, hey, Paul, even before I said a word.
Right.
Yeah, Peggy still doesn't want to talk to you. Okay, fine. I'm going to call Thursday at 10, okay? Okay, fine. This went on for about 6 months.
Wow.
And finally, I got an interview with Peggy, and she said, you're a real pain in the ass, aren't you? And I said, well, I really want to work here. I really think this is one of the stations where I can do something that's going to make me feel really good. I want to get involved in programming. She said, well, I'm the program director. I said, well, I know, but I'm telling you where I want to be down the road, but I'll come over. I'll be a jock. And I said, here's the other thing I'll do for you. I'll do all your foreground programming, which we had to do back then. All those little 15-minute features, 30-minute features, 90-second features.
Scott Turner's been over telling me all about what he did at CFNY for the compliance thing.
I'm convinced she only hired me because nobody wanted to do foreground. Like the jocks hated doing it. We used to do this feature called Spotlight. It was 15 minutes, and it was thematic. So songs about dirty laundry, and you had to talk for 30 plus seconds to qualify the whole quarter hour.
See, I think I liked foreground programming. Like that idea appeals to me.
It when people are doing it because they want to do it,
right.
you can have some really good stuff. I mean,
Right.
listen, most of what I listen to now is podcasting, which is all foreground
I was
programming.
going to say, my toast episodes I alluded to earlier, that's
Yeah.
basically what we do. Let's kick out our favorite laundry jams.
Yeah. So anyway, at some point, Peggy says, "Okay, I'm going to hire you to do foreground, and you do weekends and swing." I said, "Fantastic." And that was 81. I think it was 1987 I became PD.
Okay, now we're going to talk about a gentleman named Daynard. No, sorry, it's Don Daynard. My mistake.
You
Okay,
remember that TV commercial?
I do, because I was watching a lot of TV back then as a young man, a teenager, and I remember the commercials very, very well. But can you share with us your role in bringing Don Daynard to CHFI?
Well, I said one word, and that was yes. Tony Viner, who was, at the time, I think he was just our GM, but of course he became president and president of media. Absolutely fabulous guy. One of the smartest people I know, and I'm so happy to call him a mentor. So he and another person who I hold very close to me, Sandy Sanderson. Sandy was the PD at TR at the time, and he had a dotted line to FI, but under the previous regime, he didn't get very involved, but part of my deal was I said, I'd like Sandy to be involved. And Tony said, well, that's good because he's going to be. And, they were such a fabulous team. And what happened was we were in a meeting, and I think I was possibly pushing Roger Ashby at the time, saying, here's a guy who could do something for us. Because at FI, you have to remember, up until 86, I became music director. 87, I became program director. But prior to that, a lot of the music we played, frankly, was odd, and a lot of it was our promise of performance. We had to, all of a sudden you're going to hear Bob James playing electric piano, You're As Right As Rain, and then that's going to go into, whatever. And you're going to go, wow, that was a weird mix. But but part of the problem was we really needed to change our image. We were your mother's radio station or your grandmother's radio station. We had a fabulous show on at night called Candlelight and Wine, which was incredible, but kind of hard to have a show like that on and then play contemporary music around it, And listen, Don Parrish was amazing doing that show. There was a guy named Jeff who produced it, and Jeff wrote everything for him and picked all the music. And, Don literally would come in once or twice a week and bang off 7 scripts. And so it was all voice track, of course, with a live op sitting there. That was before automation.
Right.
And so I sat down with Tony and with Sandy and said, okay, first thing we need to do, in my opinion, and this is what I told Tony when I applied for the job, even though there was not an opening for that job at the time. I said, we really have to do this with the music. We have to do this with the imaging. We have to do this with the production. Our jocks are great, but we need a dynamic morning show. We just need that. That's what you needed back then. And, today it's not always the case. Sometimes you can get by with a really good morning show and a fantastic drive show or, whatever.
Right.
So we're talking about, okay, who's going to do the morning show? And then it was Tony, who had a mutual friend with Don. His name was Al. And, he said, Al called me up and he said, Don's not happy over at Standard. He doesn't feel as loved as he used to.
Well, the Slates took over.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay, so I can say this, you can, but the Slates took over CKFM in, I think it was like May of 87. And, Don felt that they were changing the station musically, and a bunch of the veteran radio people were fired, and he was vulnerable.
So they took over in May 87. I had my first meeting with Don in July 87.
So there you go. These are how you connect the dots on the Toronto radio circuit.
And that meeting was set up by Tony Viner. And
right.
quite possibly Sandy as well. I wasn't in on that meeting. But so, we ended up meeting with Don at a, we probably got a hotel suite or something, somewhere off the beaten path. Couldn't go to a restaurant necessarily.
It was in Leaside.
Yeah.
Okay. I was hiding in the corner taking notes. Okay.
Yeah, he had a nice little place in Leaside. Anyway, he said, well, I got to tell you guys, I'm going in for big surgery. And, I said, well, how big? He goes, well, I could die. They don't think I will, but, it was a really invasive surgery. They went in through the back and they had to deal with something in the front. I don't know exactly what it was,
right.
But it was very serious. And he said, I'm going to need 2 or 3 months to recuperate. When do you want me to start? And I said, well, as soon as you want to. He said, okay, December 1st. And so there was a little bit of legal finagling going on behind the scenes. Tony and Gary Slate, were close. They're still good friends, I'm sure. They had to work out a few things. And, back then, Gary was Gary. Now he's Mr. Slate, but back then he was Gary.
Right.
And, there was a lot of back and forth. And anyway, we started with Don December 1st of 87. With an oldies dance, and little did I realize he was up on stage kicking his heels up, and he had pneumonia that night. But he said, show's got to go on. I mean, that's the kind of trooper he was. And it was amazing. He was like putting a Titan rocket under that radio station, because it just took off. But had we not had the music and everything else ready, and the imaging, and we had a great ad campaign in mind, which you alluded to earlier. Had all that not been in place, I don't know if it would have gone as swimmingly as it did. But Don went on the air, and the ratings went up like a rocket ship. I think we went from a 5.9 to a 9.2 in one book or something. Wow.
Like that. Okay, a couple of things. One is, in a moment, I'm going to play a little audio from the debut on CHFI of Don Daynard. So
okay.
And also, I pulled an ad, too, that I think people fondly remember an ad for CHFI, a series of ads. I pulled one or two. I'm also going to call you out. Not call you out, because who am I to call you out? I wasn't there. But
call me out.
So Gary Slate.
Yep.
Who's got a few bucks? Gary, we need a sponsor Toronto Mike. Okay. So Gary, you make it sound like, Tony Viner and Gary work it out and everything's honky-dory, and next thing you know, Don Daynard's on CHFI. But am I right that CHFI wanted Don Daynard to appear in the Santa Claus Parade in 1987, and Gary Slate brought an injunction against the station so that he was not allowed to make that appearance?
In all honesty, it sounds familiar, but I couldn't put a rubber stamp on it and say yes. But I think you're right. There was so much going on getting ready for Don.
It's not as rosy as you made it sound there, Paul. Okay, you can't snow the snowman over here. Let's go.
Well, Gary, wonderful man, but he had a way of wanting things done his way back in the day, and
he was pissed. You poached his Don Daynard. Going to the enemy.
Yeah, here's the thing: you never poach anybody. They want to leave. Like, if somebody's happy.
Yeah, but you got to make them an offer, and then they accept it, and that's a poach.
Well, I don't know who first floated the idea. If Don said, hey, if you know anybody over at FI, talk to them for me. Or if Tony said, hey, he'd be a great guy, who do I talk to about setting this up? But there were a few hiccups along the way. I know Gary sued us a couple of times, or threatened to sue us a couple of times over this and that. And then we sued him one time because we came up with Toronto's Perfect Music Mix, and Gary had something that was along the lines on the air, and we sent a cease and desist.
Oh, for Mix 99.9,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
which as I know, because Humble Howard's the first guy to say Mix 99.9 on the airwaves, because he left Humble and Fred for like 18 months or something like that. Went to Mix 99.9. So I can tell you that was like 1992.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm an official historian over here. Paul, you want to play a little audio? Here.
Yeah.
Let's listen to 90 seconds of that first day. Don Daynard on CHFI.
Paulie's here, and he managed to sneak his way past Pops, the security guard. Can we say his name on the air?
We can officially say my name on the air now,
It's not a brand name, so I think we can, right?
All right. You guys go ahead and say it.
Daynard's homemade radio shows.
Here's the Daz.
Here's the Daz. Welcome to the Mighty Eye, home of the hits.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Yes, it is. This is the first day.
Yeah, what time is it?
It's 5:06.
Okay, I'm going home back to bed.
That's it.
Well, we are here officially until, I don't know how long this is going to last. The next, I don't know how many years we're going to be here. All day. We'll be here all day. Actually, it's kind of nice because Terry is here this morning, as you've just heard, and you're going to shepherd me along today.
Yeah.
You're going to remind me what the call letters are.
They're CHFI.
CHFI. That's the first time I think I ever said them on the air, just right then.
Is that right? Okay.
And it's like the commercial that's running on television.
Yeah.
I'm going to remember the call letters and forget my name. Anyway, we're going to have a good time today, and we're going to do all the things that we normally do, and...
Except we're going to take twice as long to do them.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to some music and Cutting Crew. Kick things off this morning, and I've been in love before. But not like I'm in love right now. With CHFI 98 FM in Toronto.
Somewhere.
God. Let me try that again. Yeah, Cutting Crew. I've been in love before. Here at CHFI. Good, we'll keep that one.
We'll fix it in post, Don. Okay, there you go. And then the Paul is you.
Yeah, how great to hear his voice, especially from then, because you could feel the excitement in his voice and maybe the trepidation. What have I done?
Well, the rest is history. How many years does Don Daynard spend on the air at CHFI? Many years.
Yeah, 12, I think. There were several times he wanted to quit, and he had some health issues, obviously, and you get to a certain age, your tolerance for putting up with a certain amount of bullshit fades, and
Oh yeah.
And so half my job was the morning show, and the other half was everything else.
Right.
We came up with all kinds of ways of dealing with his urges to leave and our urges to have him stay. And I'm glad we did because, boy, he and then when Erin joined him, they made some magical radio.
Well, let's talk about Erin. I'm a big Erin head. I'll disclose that off the top here, okay?
Haven't heard that term, but that's a good one.
I just coined it, Paul.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big Erin head too then because I think she's amazingly talented.
She's been here twice, and very different episodes actually, but both remarkable. And hello to Erin if you're listening in British Columbia there. So how does Erin Davis get paired with Don Daynard? Well,
once we had Don on the air and, we were excited and you could, the emotions were palpable. You could feel people tuning in. You could feel people talking about it. It was a big deal. And he, Don gave FI legitimacy, I think. We were a good station, but he made us a great station. And then when Erin joined, it became a fantastic station. No exaggeration. So Erin was doing news at CKO, and we were throwing around a bunch of names. Used to have Thursday meetings, me, Tony, and Sandy. And after Tony beat me up about the budget a few times, we'd start talking programming. And Erin's name came up, and we all went, "Oh, hadn't thought about that." And then one of us said, well, let's bring her over to do news. And if it goes as well as we think it's going to go, we'll just slide her into that co-host spot. Well, easier said than done, but it was done, and it worked out fabulous. Initially, to be honest, Don didn't want a co-host. He was used to doing a solo show, and I totally understood that. And he was used to having, Jeremy Brown and the old CKFM crew come in and do little bits with him, but it was Don's gig, and why not? That's the way it had always been done. But we had an interesting, scenario developing, and that was when the day we hired Don he was 54 or 53, but about to become 54.
Right.
The day we hired Erin, she was 25. Well, if you know anything about FM radio or or advertising in general, if there's a 25 and a 54, you've got a damn fine demo there.
Right.
And it was just coincidental that their ages worked out that way, but also their personalities, because Don, in his early to mid 50s, was a little set in his ways. He thought Hopalong Cassidy should have been president and whatever else. Erin, came onto the scene much younger, vibrant. She can take a conversation and just elevate it times 10 in a heartbeat. She's able to find the germ of a story in what you're talking about and, present it in this picture. And the two of them together, it was a little oil and vinegar, but when you shook it together, boy, it was an amazing salad dressing. And I just think they had one of the best shows in radio, period, for a number of years. They got off to a bit of a loose start. They ended up, saying goodbye to one another at the Sheraton Centre after Don's career ended, he ended it. No, we didn't end it, certainly. In between, there were a bunch of just magical moments.
Now, Erin has gone public in recent years that she never really liked Don Daynard. Have you heard these public? Again, I'm not talking out of school here. These aren't, I did once drive Erin from the airport, and these aren't private chats. This is all public stuff. But it sounds like when the red light was on, they just created compelling content that entertained the listenership. And it didn't, we've heard this from many other on-air coupling that maybe in their private time they weren't going to hang.
I would say you're not wrong.
Let's name all the public couplings that look like, I can do it with you.
But Mike, it happens with a lot of entertainment partnerships or sports partnerships. Where you hear of the leading man, the leading lady, they do their love scene on screen and then they tell each other to F off as they go their separate ways. I don't think it was quite that bad, but they were the ultimate professionals when they were
right.
I was going to say when they were in that studio, but I'm going to narrow that down to say when that red light was on.
Well, you know what? The red light. Okay, so this is the program where we dig for the real talk. That's why I'm being so tough on you, Paul, okay?
That's okay.
But a couple of legends I grew up watching on television are Gord Martineau and Ann Muskowski.
Right.
That was my station and they were my anchors, basically, Gord and Ann. And when that red light was not on, Gord was not talking to Ann. Okay, but I have no idea. What do I know? I only see what's going on when the red light's on. But you get, you have an Ann over and you get her comfy with some Great Lakes beer, and suddenly she tells you the real deal.
I think that happens a lot with I say professional couples, and I don't mean married couples. I mean couples who were in the same profession. Exactly. Yeah.
Humble and Fred get along well. I can tell you that off the air, they're getting along very, very well these days. Absolutely. But I'm, I don't know. I don't know how. I guess Ron and Don got along. I think Ron went to Don's house for a recent 90th birthday celebration. Like, they're still getting along fine, even, despite what you might read in some quarters. But yeah, it's it's a job. And when the red light's on, you're a pro. And what happens when the red light is not on is a whole different...
Well, we hire people because of their abilities and in part because of their ego, which goes hand in hand with the abilities. And they all have a certain way of wanting to do things. And when you're taking two different styles and meshing them together, it's not always smooth. Again, I don't think it's a big secret, but I won't go into detail. But there were times Don came to my office without Erin, and there were times Erin came to my office without Don. And sometimes there was crying, and sometimes there was screaming, and they both did both.
Well, let me ask you this. Who takes over for Don on the morning show when he retires?
Well, that was Bob McGee.
Right. And Bob McGee, who was working with Dave Charles until fairly recently at Element FM.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think he was the morning show guy, and that they do it out of the Chorus Key building. I got a tour there from Doug Thompson once when I delivered a Palma Pasta lasagna to him.
That lasagna gets you into places.
You know what? It's like a skeleton key, okay? Yeah. It's the key to the city, the Palma Pasta lasagna. But Where the hell was I going, Paul? You're the
Bob McGee.
Bob McGee. So it was still Bob McGee and Erin Davis. Like, I'm just trying to. I guess it's when Erin comes back from her. She's let go by Julie Adam. This is a famous story. Go listen to Erin Davis on Toronto Mike to get this story. But she goes Easy Rock, and at some point at Easy Rock, she is paired with Mike Cooper.
Yeah.
And they end up going back, and that from then on, it's Erin's name is going to be first on the name of the show.
Yeah. So Bob came onto the picture in part because I used to work with him at Chum, and I knew Bob, Denny, quite well. In fact, there was a time where he and John Major were quite close, and John Major and I got to be a little bit close for a while. In fact, he and I were ushers in a wedding together, Rick Ringer's wedding.
He's in FOTM, and
yes, he is.
Sadly, John Major died too early, and a sad
Way
loss.
too early. Yeah,
He never got him on.
He was a fabulous guy. But so I knew Denny then, and then around about the third time where Don said, "I'm done at the end of the year." That was about the third year in a row.
He sounds like Bob McCowan.
Yeah, I thought, oh, geez, he might be serious. I don't know. So we were using Bob to fill in for Don, kind of an on-air audition, really. I mean, that's the way these things work.
Sure.
And he and Erin seemed to, fit together well, get along well. I thought they did some great shows. They each had a little bit of difficulty in determining whose role was which. And shortly after I went out to Vancouver to run the Rogers BC radio stations, I would say a matter of days afterwards, Rogers got rid of Bob and Erin. And at the time it was Bob and Erin because the jingles worked better that way. There was no, your name should be first, your name should be second. It was, how are the jingles going to sound?
Yeah, but up until that point, it was always the male's name first. So it's like you might be right, but it also was going to be that way anyway.
It's certainly the way things were many, many years back. My thinking on it, call it what you will, was when you're singing a jingle, you have one syllable followed by two syllables, and it kind of works. Waking up with Don and Erin, and you can come in with the song. And there you go. And so waking up with Erin and Don, it just didn't flow as well to me. Now, maybe if I were a better singer, it might.
But Erin and Mike happened, right? And it's a similar jingle sound.
Yeah. You know what?
Come on, Paul. Hold your feet to the fire here.
I'm willing to admit it could have probably worked the other way too. I'm just telling you what the thinking was 20 years ago.
I hear you. And sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, and we were fairly jingle heavy back then, so you were hearing these a lot by design, and it just seemed to, when I sat back, closed my eyes, and listened to the station, Don and Erin, it just seemed to segue better into songs than any other way. Now, maybe if we had a different jingle package, it would have worked differently. But I forget who were using that. I think it was Jam.
Okay, I love a good jingle. Like, I'm a sucker for a good jingle.
Yep.
They just closed. My wife likes to, she's a sewist as a hobby, like where she creates clothes and stuff with a sewing machine. This is a sewist, Paul. I'm explaining
I've
to you.
never heard this term, sewist.
I know, I just learned it from her. Sewist. And that means I would often be, hey, can you bike to Fabricland and pick up this fabric or whatever? I get this order. I used to get this order a lot, and there was a Fabricland on Dundas, just into Mississauga on Dundas. Okay. Now I'm here to give you two pieces of news. One is that Fabricland is gone.
Oh, no.
I know, this is terrible. But two, what a jingle, because every time I'm asked to go to Fabricland, you know what I say? Fabricland.
That's it.
That's a great jingle. Now, and on that note, I'm going to play, it's not a jingle necessarily, but we're going to listen to one of the many ads for CHFI while you were there.
CHFI is Toronto's most listened to radio station because we play the most music.
We're the office favorite with 98 minutes of music commercial free. Commercial free? That's right, yeah.
Yeah, the new sales manager. Look, Ixnay on the commercial free thing, no money in it, no do-re-mi, I have got a plan.
Plan on spending your day with CHFI.
You fill Skydome with Jell-O, and you take 98 listeners to the top of the CN Tower. Don't forget to open the roof.
You had a run of WKRP ads for CHFI.
I am the guilty party.
I loved it.
I loved it too. And, it was a little bit of a stretch because not everybody was on board with it. But I thought it would work with us because I thought Don and Erin had that folksy feel that a WKRP, if it were real, would have had. And also, the demo that we were going after, the audience, many of them would be familiar with WKRP. Sure. And so in that, we did 3 commercials using people from that show. And
Les Nessman. I almost pulled that one.
Les Nessman, Herb Tarlick.
Yeah.
And we used Mr. Carlson.
Arthur Carlson.
And
who's afraid of his mother.
Yeah. I have to tell you, those 3 individuals, and we did another commercial too with Bob Denver, who was Gilligan,
of course,
because we were the vacation station. So what better vacation than somewhere on a deserted island? And all of them, those 4 individuals, just pros and wonderful people to deal with. None of them were prima donnas at all, and they knew what the gig was. They said, you tell me what I need to do, show me my mark. And boy, they were good. Those were good spots, I thought.
I agree with you. They were great spots. I have a question, though, at the time. How would Don Daynard and Erin Davis have done against Roger, Rick, and Marilyn, for example, in the books, in the radio?
They did very well. Now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I used to live and die by them, along with everybody else.
Right.
I think they may have traded number 1 spots for morning show here or there, and it depended if you were looking at 25-54,
right,
35-54, females only, this and that. I would say they were comparable shows in terms of talent and quality and all of that. They were both excellent shows. A little bit different, and they were excellent shows.
For those who are, I don't know if the youngsters listening can understand the Toronto radio wars of the 1980s. Okay,
I tell you, they were vicious. They were vicious, and I was in the middle of it along with everybody else who was there. And we lived and died by those 4 books, which later became 3, which later became 2, which later became electronic and all of that. But
the PPM devices.
Yeah,
sure.
But back in the day. And probably still, I don't know if it's still the case today, but CHFI was the number 1 billing radio station in Canada year after year after year after year. Was it 10 years? Was it 12 years? I don't know. Does it continue on today? I don't look at those numbers anymore because I don't see them. But we were the number 1 billing radio station. And in many cases, we were the number 1 audience station in terms of QM and in terms of TSL.
Incredible.
Time spent listening.
Look at you. Yeah, amazing. Any truth to this rumor? Would you have any insight into this rumor I heard that Ted Rogers had it in his will that Rogers cannot ditch radio?
I don't know.
You've heard this though, right?
To be honest, no, I haven't heard it. But
you just did. I'm starting this rumor.
But I'll tell you, I always got along very well with Ted. And the reason for that was I was looking after his baby, CHFI.
Right.
He wouldn't know my name otherwise.
Well, Ted, much respect for the late Ted Rogers.
Oh, he was an amazing leader. I don't know what he was like in the boardroom,
right,
or any other rooms for that matter. But he was inspirational. They just don't have owners like that anymore anywhere.
Well, I'm just here to suggest, as I see the smile on your face here. Okay. Maybe the Ted Rogers statue belongs at Rogers HQ there on where is that, Bloor and Jarvis there. Yeah. I'm just here to tell you, as a Torontonian for 5 decades, we would rather see Joe Carter, maybe a statue of Joe Carter touching them all, versus Ted Rogers outside the Dome. The fact that the only statue outside of the Sky Dome, sorry, I'm calling it that, the only statue outside the Sky Dome, okay. Well, the only statue, I heard Herb Tarlick say Sky Dome, and I got excited there.
Well, that was before Ted bought it.
Yes, of course. But the only statue outside the Sky Dome is Ted Rogers, and I think that's a damn bloody shame.
Well, listen, I second it. Put him up near his radio station.
Right. That's where the Rogers statues belong.
Yeah, he boy, he was just one of a kind. He'd walk into a room and, he could take an $8,000 suit and make it look like he just pulled it off the rack at the Bay. The suit was always worth $8,000 or whatever the heck it was worth.
Right.
But, Ted just didn't care about that. He cared about his ideas and his goals and in a lot of ways, his staff and all of that. He was a great leader, I thought.
When did Candlelight and Wine become Lovers and Other Strangers?
Well, there was a little gap in between that. Okay. When I was still music director, hadn't become program director yet, because there was no opening, and I was waiting to see what would happen down the road. And so I remember talking with Peggy and saying, I love Candlelight and Wine, but it's an albatross around our neck. It's a fantastic show that is now perhaps not on the right station anymore.
Right.
Put it over there on Easy Rock.
It's more of an Easy Rock thing. I was going to say.
The way Easy Rock sounded back then.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
Don wanted to. Don Parrish wanted to pull back a bit. He was getting on, and he was. I think he was living out near Bowmanville or somewhere, and he'd drive in to do voice tracks. But then it was, well, I got a voice gig, so I'll do the voice tracks this day. And I'm only coming in for voice gigs, and can we rearrange all this? And we just kind of came to the conclusion that we needed to transition away from it. But, I often believe in evolution, not revolution. There's times when you need a revolution, but there's a lot of times when you need evolution. So we started a show, which I hosted, actually, simply because I was the available guy, called, what do we call it? Night Magic. And it was a more contemporary Candlelight and Wine musically, and not as much spoken word. Because Don Parrish would read poetry or tell you about Elizabethan England because of this particular Shelley piece that he was about to read and that sort of thing. Anyway, so we had Night Magic on, and somewhere along the way I became program director, and we sort of kept the show on the air. But when I first worked in Oshawa, I worked with a guy named Don Jackson, who from Lovers and Other Strangers.
Sure.
Don was doing the morning show in Oshawa. I'd been there maybe a year or so, and he got a job. I think it was CJAD in Montreal. It was Montreal anyway. FM 96, I think he got the gig at. Anyway, he stayed there for years and years and years. And maybe 15 years after we'd worked together, somehow we connected. And I said, well, what are you up to? I know you're in Montreal. He goes, I'm doing the show, Lovers and Other Strangers. So I had to get someone to do an air check for me because we didn't have internet. I couldn't just dial it up.
Right.
And their signal didn't reach Toronto. Anyway, I heard this show, Lovers and Other Strangers. I thought, wow, that's like Candlelight and Wine on the moon. Like, that's amazing. And, talked it over with my bosses and said, I want to take a big left turn here. What do you think? And they said, well, it's your left turn. You crash, you're out. So do it. So we brought Don over, and I think, Don passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, yes. Don Jackson.
Yes.
Boy, he just did a great show. He lived and died for that show, and I mean that somewhat literally. If ever you had something to say about the show, it's like, Don, could you just play a couple of extra CanCons before midnight, because we were a little low last week. And he'd go, but I can't. The song doesn't fit the mood. I can't. And he's emotional, and it's like, oh Jesus, Don, just fucking play a Gordon Lightfoot song. Play Beautiful. Play something. We need more CanCon at night. But he loved doing that show, and his fans, like, he was number one at night. Any demo, anywhere. Wow. Maybe 12 to 17 he wasn't number one, but he probably was with females. It was an incredible show. I wish someone could put all those shows together and maybe it's out there and I don't know about it, but it would be great to have a Lovers and Other Strangers website and have all those shows, but I don't know that there's a record of them or copy of them.
Oh, geez, if you don't know, I don't think they exist.
Well, Don Jackson would have had them because, logger tapes got erased every 30 days and the quality was crap anyway. we would store his shows on 10-inch reels for when he was on holiday, but we didn't have 5,000 10-inch reels.
Right. Well, I mean, the BBC deleted episodes of Doctor Who because they needed the tape space. Okay, so it's hard to realize what life was like before digital.
I'll tell you, a show like Lovers and Other Strangers, you put that on the air tonight in Toronto. Which station? That's a tough one now because they've all sort of changed a bit, but you could find a home for it and it would generate good audience numbers. And I think nowadays more than ever, people are frantic more than ever. Forget politics and all that. We've all had our fill of that. But Lovers and Other Strangers was an escape. Right. If you were with somebody, you escaped with them. If you wanted to be away from them, you escaped away from them. But
don't you think what you're describing now is a podcast?
Yes. And you know what? Really, most foreground radio shows, and Lovers was a foreground radio show. It's a podcast. Someone could do it.
There is an issue. I own a company that produces podcasts. There is an issue with playing the music on podcasts. Like this is an actual issue today.
Where
the radio doesn't have this issue because of the SOCAN and everything, and they have the license to play the song.
But you're still, as a radio station, you're still paying for that. You're paying SOCAN.
Yeah, right. But they are paying SOCAN. There is no SOCAN jurisdiction over a podcast. Like a podcast can't play a Gordon Lightfoot song legally. It's a huge. Anyways, we can talk offline, but it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
But I just realized you're very easy to talk to, and I'm very interested in the subject matter, even though I never listened to CHFI a moment in my life. Would that shock you?
Well, you don't know what you were missing.
I know, but I love talking about it. Okay, I'm learning. Even Chum FM, at least I would tune in for the Sunday Funnies with Rick Hodge.
With Rick, yeah.
And I like Dr. Demento. They would air Dr. Demento, and I liked Theater of the Mind. Like, you know what I mean? But
I love Theater of the Mind. In fact, we tried to do that on a Sunday, many, many years ago, and we got a nice cease and desist letter from Chum saying, you can't use these particular shows because we have them licensed. And they were right. But I thought, what the hell? You don't try? If you don't ask, you don't get.
Paul Fisher's got to give it a go. Here, so I'm not done with you yet. Don't think you're off the hook quite yet. I want to give you a few gifts, and I definitely want to ask you about this book and make sure I pick up a couple of the radio stories you're itching to tell, particularly one you teased about CFTR going all news.
Oh, yeah. So
well, let me give you the gifts first because you made a long drive to get here. I've already given you some beer and I gave you some lasagna. I have a wireless speaker for you, Paul.
Oh, fantastic. I can put empty content into it.
You can put empty content into it, but you also have to put season 8 of Yes, We Are Open because Al Grego went to Regina, Saskatchewan. Have you ever been to Regina?
I've flown over it many times.
That doesn't count. Okay, I'm not counting that. But Al visited Tracy Bosch, the owner of Zippity Zoom Toys, and Tracy shared the inspiring story of how she started the toy store in 2009, juggling a newborn and a new business, and she talks about the evolution of the store, her background in retail, and her passion for toys. Listen to Yes, We Are Open. You get great inspiring stories like that, courtesy of the cuddly one, who I will see confirmed for TMLX 19, and I am going to make sure, I think he'll be at TMLX 18 at Christie Pitts. We'll find out, but shout out to FOTM Al Grego. There's a measuring tape here, Paul, for you from Ridley Funeral Home.
See if the box is long enough.
And that reminds me now of the WKRP. They did the Ferryman's. Do you remember this? The Ferryman's jingle for the funeral home.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it all comes back to Venus Flytrap. Okay, so I want to just shout out Ridley Funeral Home because they have a great podcast called Life's Undertaking, hosted by Brad Jones. I get to co-host that. But also, they only sell Canadian caskets at Ridley Funeral Home, and I love the Canadian companies supporting Canadian goods. So speaking of that, this is the final day of April that I'm recording, and there was a deal with a great Canadian company called Silver Wax. They've been around since 1999. They're out of Quebec. And Silver Wax wants guests of Toronto Mike in April to receive a robust car cleaning kit. And you're the last guy to get this, Paul. You ready for this? It's not just that spray bottle. What you got in your hand there?
Yeah.
You got the interior, the exterior cleaning fluid. Do you see the where you put your? I wanted to call it a purse.
This bucket.
It's a purse. That's
it's a merce.
It's. I carry a purse. Okay, that bucket. That is your Silver Wax car cleaning kit. So you get the bucket, You get the spray bottles, and everyone listening can go to silverwax.ca and use the promo code TorontoMike10, and you'll save 10%. And I'm telling you, they make cleaning easy, and they do a great job. If you want a nice, clean car, you want Silver Wax.
Jeez, I feel like I'm doing a morning show here, getting all this freebie.
All this swag?
All this swag.
All this swag.
But listen, all these presents, thank you so much, because my girlfriend's birthday is coming up
It's
middle
in the
of
freezer.
June.
I know you were lifting that box. You're like, it's pretty light.
The
That's
Palma
in my
pasta.
freezer.
Well, this will go in the freezer at home, and Maureen's birthday is middle of June, so I don't have to go shopping now. This is fantastic.
I'm taking care of you, Paul.
Oh.
It was worth the drive to New Toronto.
Toronto, Mike, you're the man.
Toronto,
you're the
thank you.
Toronto man.
I'm the Toronto man. Okay, move over. Oh, I was gonna say, who will I pick on? Move over, Brian Master. I am the man now. Okay, one last tip, and then I want to get that CFTR story. You've been amazing. I can't believe how easy it was to go 90 minutes with you. You're going to be like, Mike, you didn't tell me this was a 6-hour episode. I'm like, sorry.
Well, you're paying by the hour, so I'm stretching it out.
I'm paying in pasta, though. I'm paying in pasta here. I want to just tell you about recyclemyelectronics.ca. That's where you go if you have old cables, old electronics. You don't throw that in the garbage. The chemicals end up in our landfill. You go to recyclemyelectronics.ca, put in your postal code, and find out where you can drop it off to be properly recycled. Got that, Paul?
Got it.
Last but not least, shout out to Nick Iones from Fusion Corp. He hosts Building Toronto's Skyline and a new podcast called Building Success. And we'll be recording new episodes on Friday morning, and I urge you to subscribe and listen. Nick has stepped up to fuel the real talk. On that note, I mentioned that Silver Wax, this is the last day of the Silver Wax giveaway. So effective tomorrow, I will be giving guests. In fact, you know what? I'm going to get you one, Paul, because it's a great book about Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. And welcome back, Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. They will be joining us for the month of May. Excited to talk about them in more detail tomorrow. Give me that CFTR story.
Well, you remember TR being the big top 40 station, and they were. Look at that.
Evelyn Macco gave me that.
Well,
that was my station, Tom Rivers in the morning.
Evelyn factors into this story.
Okay.
So 680, CFTR, but 680 News was looked after by John Hinnon.
Yes.
And so John, Tony, and Sandy, and others, but those three primarily, decided it was time to change the format on TR because they could see where the numbers were going ultimately for music on AM radio. And the day came when the big switch was going to happen. And I remember, Tony telling us that he had a talk with Ted, and he said, Ted, I've got a fabulous idea. You're only going to lose money on this for 7 years. Ted said, I'm in.
Sounds good to Ted.
As it turned out, just jumping ahead, at the end of year 5, 680 News broke even and started making money.
Wow.
2 years ahead of schedule. And there were times, and again, I don't see the revenue numbers anymore, but there were times when they were the number one billing station in the country. So anyway, the day came when CFTR was going to become 680 News. Mm-hmm. Sandy was overseeing TR, obviously, and had a meeting scheduled with all the jocks and all the key players there. And there was a newscast at 9:00, and Evelyn was doing the news. And so my job was to follow Evelyn into the newsroom, into the news booth, rather. And she goes, what are you doing in here? I got a newscast to do. I said, Evie, you don't have a newscast to do. What are you talking about? What do you mean? I said, there's a big change. It's just about to happen. I'm in here just to make sure that we don't go on the air from this booth. So just look at me and I'll try to explain what's happening. Wow. And within seconds, 680 News made it onto the air. It wasn't live immediately because, frankly, everybody who was on 680 News had to have a week of intense practice and prep to get used to this news wheel that was so alien in Canada. Now, very big in New York with wins,
right?
But never done in Canada, or certainly not to this extent. And poor Evie, and we laugh about it occasionally when we see each other. Well, we laugh about it all the time, occasionally when we see each other. So she would say, I was ready to just put a microphone stand through your head because you're not going to stop the news. I said, Evie, don't do the news. It's okay. Everything's taken care of. In a second, you're going to hear audio. Because, of course, then we had 5 seconds of dead air or something. And she's panicking, as anybody would who's in an on-air.
Sure.
And it was...
Wow.
Evie, just wait. And by the way, as a news person, you're going to love this change.
Right.
And she did, of course.
Because Dick Smythe was there, of course, and Evelyn Macco, and they weren't getting the tap on the shoulder.
No. And, 680 News, well, I can't imagine Toronto without it now.
We did it for the was it the 30th? We did a special episode of Toronto Mic'd where we played clips and talked about the history of 680 News. And
yeah, I see your mic sock there. Or whatever
Scott Metcalf gifted me that.
Oh, good.
So.
Scotty, yeah.
One last question. I remember at the time, 93, I guess we're talking about, there was a race. Who will go all news first, 640 or 680?
I remember that going on. And 640 was jumping around a lot back then. They were...
the Hog.
The Hog, that was it. The Beast.
I remember the Hog.
Yeah, and... that was an interesting time. I mean, they took that idea from a station in Florida, right? The Power Pig. And the Hog works for Toronto, Hogtown, for those who remember what that term means, long before I was born.
Right.
680, Rogers jumped out in front first and never looked back.
It's worth noting that when you're at CHFI, you're working with a young Paul Cook. Yes. In fact, when I started at FI, Paul Cook was an operator on FI. I'd finish at 6 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and Paul or somebody would come in and run voice tracks till midnight. And I mean, look at the media sensation he became. Well, and now he's married to an MPP.
Boy, there are so many lines I could use after that, and I won't because I love Steph. But congratulations to Stephanie Smythe. Boy, that was a great accomplishment.
There you go. That's FOTM Stephanie Smythe. Please get it right. And FOTM Paul Cook. Okay.
And next time I can be FOTM.
Yeah, well, you are now.
Oh,
it's
okay.
official already.
I'm in.
All right. So because we took so much time, it's funny. You need to tell me, because I do want to hear about the book and if there's another book in you. But is there any other radio stories that you think I would be interested in hearing right now?
Mike, there are so many.
If you need a sequel, literally in the summer, you could, if you're in the neighborhood, you can pop in and do another Tell Me More Stories. I know. What are we at? I'll be honest, because I have to pick up my daughter.
You're about an hour and 35, I think.
So I'm not playing you off here, but you want to give me the best of the rest radio story, and then I know we didn't even get you out of CHFI, really.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
And that was a long time ago.
I had some wonderful times out west, living in Vancouver, and
that's for Vancouver Mike to investigate.
Yeah, true enough. No, I don't. I don't have any gotta hear stories immediately, but I'm very, very thankful for all the incredibly talented people I got to work with. I can tell you, for any station, even with Daynard on FI, it's never, and Erin, of course, it's never just one person. It's sooner or later, it's the team that gets you there, but it's good to have a figurehead.
So why do you leave? Maybe we'll wrap it up with why you leave Rogers.
Well, Rogers left me, actually. So working out there for 6 years, we were doing very well. Our EBITDA was around 35%, which was above what was expected. We did very well, but it was 2008. A number of people in certain positions were let go. And sometimes it depended what you made monetarily. Sometimes it was political. I think it was a combination of all those things. And when it happened, I was disappointed, but I knew I wasn't done. So I had to take 3 years off work, almost 3 years. That was the deal. I couldn't even work at Home Depot as a greeter or Walmart as a greeter. I couldn't work in the plumbing. And, every 3 months I'd get an email or a phone call saying from the HR department, just making sure you haven't made any money. No, I haven't made any money. But then, once that no compete ran out, I got to work with Astral, and then with Bell when Bell bought Astral. I still call him Astral. Everybody calls him Astral, but
no, I heard it was Astral. So,
yeah.
I'm with you there.
Yeah. Well, I spent 3 years working with Ian Lurie there, and he was a wonderful guy to work with. Smart guy, wonderful dry sense of humor, and boy, does he know his stuff, radio and money-wise. So, I'm just thankful that I had a wonderful career and never worked a day in my life.
Wow. That's a great story. I gotta say, I love going down memory lane of the old radio stories. And I used to do a lot more of these episodes. And then a couple of things happened. One is people who work for one of the big telecoms, basically they weren't allowed to come over, or they were afraid to say things. Like, this is a thing that happened, right? So that they might want to come over, but either their PR people said you're not allowed to go on Toronto Mike, or they basically were afraid they'd say something, then they'd be fired. Like, there's a lot of fear. So that happened. And also I sort of, instead of the people who play the music, I sort of got into talking to the musicians who created the art. Yeah,
which is great too. I mean, I've heard some of those with the musicians, but there's only one person who can fire me now. And
that guy's name is Paul.
No, her name is Maureen.
Well, she's getting the Palma Pasta lasagna for her birthday in June. So.
Let me tell you, that goes a long way.
Well, tell me about, give me a moment. We have at least a few minutes here. I'm very interested in what caused you to write Like a River to the Sea. Who are you to write a book, Paul?
Who the hell am I? Yeah. I remember in grade 12, my English teacher, we had to hand in stories. And she said, you will never be a writer. Don't even bother. You'll probably make a good, whatever. And ever since then, I thought, what an awful thing to say as an English teacher. So when I was 20, a very traumatic thing happened in my life. My father died. And as it turned out, I was visiting with him, and I was with him when he died 6 times. So he would flatline, asystole. You hear it in all the ER shows now.
Yeah.
And the crew would come in, the medical crew, and they'd bring him back. For some strange reason, which I know now is not so strange, I was there that entire weekend. It was a little hospital called Northwestern General, which was on Keele Street, I think north of Eglinton. It's not there anymore. I don't know what it is now. If this had been Toronto General or Sunnybrook or somewhere, they wouldn't have let me in the ICU for that long. For whatever reason, I was there, and every time he came back, we talked about it as best we could with his raspy voice from tearing out the ET tube and all of that. And for years and years, all I did was read books on what he told me, which was essentially there's something beyond this. And it's not religious, and it's not scary. It's not heaven and hell. And so I tried for years to write a book about it, and it was always crap, frankly. I just wasn't doing it right. When I finished with radio, finally, my brain was empty enough that I could write. And it's true. I mean, for me to write, I have to empty my head. And I can't empty my head when I'm listening to air checks and studying budgets and doing all of that. I mean, writers really need to be writers, I think.
Right.
So since I've, quote unquote, retired from radio, I write. And I had my first book published about 2 years ago. It's called Like a River to the Sea. It's a book about reincarnation, but it's not a religious book. It's not a self-help book. It's not a do these 5 things every day book. It's a novel. And I just wanted to tell the story of an imaginary guy, and he's totally imaginary, and what happens when he dies.
Wow. Okay, Like a River to the Sea.
Yeah, it's go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble. You can order it, and it'll come in a day. I don't think there's a lot of physical copies in bookstores. It's mostly online sales, but it's through a legitimate publisher. Like, I didn't self-publish.
Right.
It's a little publisher in the States, and boy, I sent out 400 queries, and the ones I heard back from, all the form letters. That was so depressing. And then finally one day I get this woman emailing me going, I just spent the weekend reading your book. We were interested in publishing it.
Well, when I read Glenda's chat with you about Like a River to the Sea, she mentions that she was put in touch with you via FOTM Carla Collins.
Oh, dear Carla, yes.
Which I just saw the name. I mean, for a short period of time during the pandemic, I produced Carla's podcast.
Well, Carla was the designated fill-in for Erin when Erin was away. And she was wonderful. But, you know, Don always would say, do you think we could get her back again? he loved working with her.
What's
loved
not to
working
love?
with her.
What's not
And
to love?
I just went to go see her, a couple of her stand-up shows recently. She's Carla's wonderful. She's so off the wall, there's no wall.
And she ended up at CKFM.
She did end up at CKFM. You know, today she could jump into a radio gig in a heartbeat, or a TV gig. And she actually wrote the screenplay for my book for me. And we're trying to shop it, but we're not doing well, but we're trying to shop it around.
Okay, but what a small world. And is there another book in you? On our way out here, maybe I'll even start the Rob Pruce cover of Rosie and Gray, but is there another book in you?
Yes, in fact, I've got 300 pages done. And I'm hoping by early, middle summer it'll be done.
Well, congrats on that. Congrats on Like a River to the Sea. I can barely read a book. You wrote a book. Like, I'm thoroughly impressed. And what a great career you had in radio.
And there's an audio book read by me.
I was hoping you'd say Carla Collins.
You know,
had I been thinking. You have a great voice. You should be on the radio.
I are one.
My friend, amazing. I got to shout out again. Thank you, Jeff Lumby, for the suggestion. And then Dave Charles earlier this year, who kind of re-upped it. And then we made this happen, and I'm so glad. So thanks for making the trek to South Etobicoke, man.
Beautiful. Lovely time. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,681st show. Is that right, Paul? Oh, it's 82. Let's do that again. I'll fix it in post here. And that brings us to the end of our 1,682nd show. Go to torontomike.com for all your Toronto Mike needs. Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery, Palma Pasta, Moneris, recyclemyelectronics.ca, Building Toronto Skyline, Ridley Funeral Home, and for the last time, much love and a big thanks to Silver Wax. Use the promo code TorontoMike10 at silverwax.ca. Save 10%. See you all tomorrow when my special guest is... I'm just vamping as I go into my calendar. My special guest tomorrow is... Pause for dramatic effect. Oh, filmmaker Kyrie Papoots. I watched his documentary about Parkdale, not far from where you used to live, and it blew my mind, and I said, I got to talk to this guy. What a beautiful documentary. We'll talk about that tomorrow at 2 o'clock. See you all then.